Hello class, chapter 3, acceptance, my favorite chapter of the book. These things are usually taking me a day extra because I record them and then sometimes I mess them up and I have to re-record them. Sometimes they don't upload when I think they've uploaded, and it's just somewhat a little bit more challenging than I thought. So I apologize for being a day late. I did record a message for yesterday and then I don't know where it went, so let's try again. Yesterday's was super long, so maybe I can be a little more efficient this time. Remember, we do have class again on February 15th. That is 2 weeks, 2 class weeks from now, officially 13 days. Let's get straight into the chapter. There's a bunch of definitions on the left side of the page where the chapter starts, or the second page where the chapter starts. I'll let you read those on your own. They're pretty self-explanatory. They don't make a big deal for purposes of the important concepts for acceptance. We'll start with the mirror image rule, which is a form of acceptance. We'll contrast that with the Uniform Commercial Code. We'll talk about authorized means of acceptance, which is a little bit out of order from the chapter. And then we'll get into the mailbox rule. So we're going to talk about what it means to accept, how to accept, who may accept, contrast that with the UCC, and then get into the draconian, archaic, and mailbox rule. The mirror image rule in common law, that is non-uniform commercial contracts, is very simple. You must accept the offer exactly as the offer was submitted. That is the only way to accept. Anything other than that, to change the terms, is a counteroffer, which destroys the initial offer. If I make an offer for A, B, C, and D, and the other party says, I accept A, B, and C, that's not valid acceptance. That is a counteroffer, which I can then myself accept or reject. Once anything but an acceptance, according to the terms of the contract, counteroffer, rejection, whatever the case may be, destroys the original offer. It's gone. We talked about that last week. So mirror image rule, must accept the exact terms of the offer. That's your common law rule. That's black letter law. Authorized means of acceptance. This is a little bit, we touched on it last week as well. The offeror can require acceptance for it to be valid acceptance in any means that they choose to. There's the example I think we brought up last week of the florist. It's in the book where, if you're a florist and the florist says, here's my offer. If you accept, you must call us in order to accept. You cannot mail us acceptance. And the acceptance by mail came, and the florist said that's not valid acceptance. We do not have a contract. And that's what happens if you don't accept by the means required, is the contract never forms. Now, the contract can be silent as to forms of acceptance, and therefore any valid means of acceptance is okay. But if it's specific as to the means of acceptance, then it must be accepted by those exact means, whether it's pink ink, whether it's by phone, whether it's by email only, whether it's by snail mail, international courier, whatever the case may be. Having a courier on a bicycle in the middle of New York City delivered to the first level of a skyscraper. It doesn't matter. The offer controls the offer. Who may accept? On most contracts, and especially bilateral contracts, the only person authorized to accept is that individual who the offer was made. If, I think one of the examples is, you're riding on a subway and I have my computer open and I get an offer from, Groupon actually does a lot of offers that are specific to some of their clients. They'll pinpoint certain demographics, I've noticed. And so in my email, I can choose to go to the page to notifications and choose to accept their terms. The person next to you, unless they're made that same offer, can't just take your offer. And the struggled for a few semesters of this class to come up with a good example, but Groupon is one of those instances where they'll send me an email for 20% off. They may not send it to the person next to me. The person next to me cannot accept that offer. That offer was intended for me only. We can see how this is contrasted with a unilateral offer where McDonald's, offers a 2 for $3 deal Just because I saw it on the billboard doesn't mean that it's specifically an offer to me. Anybody can accept it. And in fact, a contract can say the first person to accept wins. So that's, you can do that. If there's an advertisement that gets mailed out to me, but not my neighbor, that says the first 50 people to come to our store and purchase this jacket, get the jacket for X price until they're gone, neighbor sees that, they can go do it, So most bilateral contracts, though, are required to be accepted only by by a certain specific person. You can see that in contract cases for housing where you'll contract with a specific general contractor, but perhaps that general contractor is authorized to use any subcontractors they choose, or maybe the contract requires a general contractor to use only specific subcontractors. So, I mean, again, the offer or controls the offer. You can accept by conduct when it is appropriate under the contract. You might have a contract that says, I'll pay you $100 to paint my door blue. If you accept, please perform by XY date. And if that date is complied with, it doesn't have to be in writing, don't have to communicate it. The actual performance of the contract is what makes the contract valid. Another important point, and I know we talked about it earlier, but it's critical if you'll take that for what it's worth, is if there is a counter offer that constitutes a new offer destroying the previous offer, and that can only be accepted as stated. So the person who originally was in the acceptance position is now the offeror and now controls the terms of the offer. But the first offer is therefore destroyed. Now, under the Uniform Commercial Code, it's much more relaxed. And in class, we would have gone over this for probably half the class. But in the Uniform Commercial Code, the acceptance does not have to mirror the offer. And this only applies between merchants. And merchants, the definition's in the book, but it's generally those individuals or companies who deal in whatever it is that is being exchanged. Two merchants would be, Apple and Walmart buying iPhones for Christmas. If Walmart says we'll buy 100 units for store X to be delivered in 7 days, it must be delivered before 5 p.m., and they send a whole bunch of other provisions, and Apple says, we accept, and they send their own invoice over, and that says that no delivery shall be made past, or actually I guess it would say prior to 5 p.m., that's still a valid contract, even though the two don't mirror each other, as long as the material terms, the price, quantity, duration, and to an extent under UCC, the gap fillers are all correct. So you do not have to have a mirror contract under the UCC to have a valid contract. That's the big distinction. Merchant to merchant, mirror image rule does not apply. Mirror image rule is what it sounds like. One must mirror the other. So that's the distinction between UCC only between merchants and common law. If there is a contract between merchant and consumer, you are still under the mirror image rule. Okay, the best part of the book, which quite frankly is probably at this stage of the game the most draconian, is the mailbox rule. Now this was a little bit harder for someone like me, where this class is designed to be in class, so there aren't a bunch of fancy graphics, but the mailbox rule demonstrates valid acceptance when you have offers and acceptance that are conveyed over distances and therefore over time. We don't run into this problem as much now that we're dealing with email and instantaneous acceptance. I need to adjust the phone a little because the light's coming a little bit more. So the mailbox rule, try and verbally describe it, is essentially that if there is an offer and an acceptance, as long as that acceptance is put in the mailbox prior to expiration of the offer or a rescission of the offer, it is valid acceptance. So for example, On day one, Jane mails a contract to John, and the contract says whatever it says. You have to accept within 5 days of receipt or whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. So on day one, Jane mails that, and that arrives to John on day two. Jane on day two has a change of heart and says, nope, I don't want this contract anymore. So she then mails a rescission that says, I withdraw my offer, and that withdrawal is on its way and still in transit on day three. Now, she's mailed out the withdrawal of the offer, and we know John got the initial offer on day two. Now, on day three, while the rescission, the withdrawal of the offer is still in transit, on day three, John then mails a letter that says, I accept, and he places it in his mailbox. That mailbox can be at a post office or outside his front door or at his office or whatever the case may be, but it's put in the mailbox. Now, let's say that he missed the mail, and in fact, the post office guy does not come, the postal worker doesn't come to pick it up until day four. Now, when the postal worker comes on day four, he grabs John's mail, including the acceptance, and also delivers John the withdrawal of the initial offer. And the acceptance is then on its way back to Jane. You have a valid contract. There was an offer and an acceptance, and the acceptance was made before the withdrawal of the offer. So just because, the main point to take away from it is just because Jane sent her withdrawal of the offer on day two, as long as John accepts before he receives the withdrawal, it is valid acceptance. You might want to rewind and listen to that again. I don't know even, I think we're going to be back in class before the next quiz is released, and we'll map this one out. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure we had a class before we went on to testing, because next week would be chapter 4, and so I think we'll be in class. At any rate, if John would have received the withdrawal before he accepted, regardless of what the date of acceptance is. Obviously, if the date of acceptance has expired, there isn't anything to accept anyways. But if the date of acceptance hasn't expired and he receives a withdrawal and then he places his acceptance in the mail, he can't accept. But it doesn't matter. It's all about transit, and we can see how this worked in a time period where things took time to travel. You know, how they ended up calling it the mailbox rule when this rule has probably been in place even before there were mailboxes, is a common phenomenon. But you know, with email, with that instantaneous delivery, it becomes somewhat of a non-issue, because you can, you know, send a email with a contract at 12 o'clock that goes into John's email box at 12:01 or 12 o'clock and 1 second, and then you have a change of heart 5 minutes later. You send that withdrawal. We know John gets it 5 minutes later exactly, and then he tries to accept it 5 minutes and 1 second. He can't do it. But because of the timestamp, as long as he accepts before he receives that withdrawal of the offer email, then he's fine. So acceptance, that's the mailbox rule, and it used to cross paths. A lot easier to demonstrate in class, but you know, this is what we're doing this semester, so it's fine. Email me if you have questions on it. Maybe I can figure out how to do a graph. I'll try that if that would be helpful, but I'll need some communication on that, preferably sent to my jts@simonslawfirm.com email. And other than that, I have not looked at the quizzes. I plan to do so, nor have I reviewed the discussion. I will do so, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and try and get a video up on time next week. Like I said, it's a learning curve for me too. So thank you very much.